Recording. So welcome guys to today's session. Today we are specifically going to talk about how can we really deploy Dynatrace on the Kubernetes cluster, right? And what are the methodologies, how Dynatrace really interacts with Kubernetes, how Dynatrace does all of these things in the background, how I can make sure that everything works fine for me, right? That is what we are going to discuss, right? So why Kubernetes? Because we have been discussing on the WhatsApp group for quite some time now, and we all love Kubernetes. That's probably the reason why we are just heading into that space, right? So, what's in the agenda for today, right? We'll try to quickly wrap it up because we just have got 40 minutes and we have to cover Q&As, we have to cover a lot of things, but this is where primarily everything is going to be. So what Kubernetes is, I'm not going to cover it in a great depth about Kubernetes. It's more going to be centered around Dynatrace, but what Kubernetes basically is, right? What or how one agent really works on Kubernetes. That's the second topic that we are going to see in today's session. Third, what are the available deployment models, right? And with that, we will also try to see one of the models and how we really go on and install Dynatrace within our own environments, right? And in the end, we are just going to have a quick Q&A for any set of questions that you have, right? And at any given point of time, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the WhatsApp chat or the Zoom chat. So I'll be able to see all of your questions and I'll be able to answer it, not immediately, but definitely. And if some questions goes unanswered, put it in the WhatsApp group. We will get the answers for the same, right? So quickly just getting started, right? So let's understand what Kubernetes is. Right? So how Kubernetes really works, or what Kubernetes really offers, or why Kubernetes, why not the traditional data center approach? Why not our own set of servers or something else, right? Because Kubernetes is a portable, extensible, open source platform that is being used for managing your containerized environment, right? So that's one of the key areas for Kubernetes, right? And when I say portable open source, right, it basically gives you the flexibility to run your application within containers or within a containerized environment. So that's the benefit for Kubernetes, right? And why Kubernetes? We can do all of these things in our own setup, right? We can do all of these things in our own environment, right? So the reason for having Kubernetes within your environment, or the reason why industry adopted towards Kubernetes or moved towards Kubernetes or shifted, is just because you define a configuration, right? So I'm just putting it in on a very high level, right? It's more of a layman terms that I'm using, but there were a lot of use cases, right? So the reason behind that is that you define a configuration for your application and everything gets taken care automatically by Kubernetes itself. So you don't really have to go back, restart the servers. You don't have to do a lot of things. You don't have to manage if something goes down. Kubernetes will bring that back up, right? So that's where the Kubernetes automation really played along with the industry, right? So let's take a quick example, right? That let's say Amazon has got a great Indian festival sale, right? And you don't really know how much amount of traffic that you're going to get in that entire day, right? So you cannot really calculate or understand that, okay, these many resources are the ones that I'll be needing, or this is going to be the upper limit of my resources, right? So that's where Kubernetes can help you, or that's where the orchestrator can really help you to understand and assess on the given parameters. It will automatically spin up instances the minute you require all of them, right? So let's say if I don't have traffic as of now, I will scale it down to, let's say, 2 servers at a time. But the minute I receive a lot of traffic, I can spin more number of servers, automatically add it in the load balancer, do all of that configuration, and no manual changes are required because that's all going to be taken care by Kubernetes internal resources itself, right? So that's where Kubernetes automation and both kind of easy, quick configurations help in rapidly growing the ecosystem for all of the organizations. So that's, again, so everything that I'm stating, these are documented references from the specific vendors or probably from Dynatrace or different sources, and all of the reference links are here on these sites, which I'll be sharing post the session, right? So what are the services, or what are the let's say, offerings of Kubernetes, right? So Kubernetes gives you the flexibility to do or break a monolith kind of an application into microservices, right? So if people are familiar with the concept of Java beans or JBeans, right? What you create small objects, or let's say you create small beans or modules, and you just plug and play, and you use it along within your application. So let's say if tomorrow you want to make a change, you don't have to change the bigger application, you just change that particular small object, right? So that's where within Kubernetes, you define or you create smaller services, which we call as microservices, and that gets pinned up, and that is automatically being load balanced, and everything is being taken care by Istio, the service mesh, right, and different other things, right? So let's say you need more storage, you need more resources, you need anything, right? So Kubernetes will automatically scale up or scale down depending upon the configuration that you have set within your cluster, right? Anything that goes down or anything that has an impact, it roll back those changes. It can bring things up or bring them down automatically, and you don't really have to worry about all of these, right? So let's say anything broke, right? Kubernetes also offers self-healing, right, which can be used. And there are plenty of these different cases. I'm not going to talk about each one of them, but yes, this is what Kubernetes really offers, right? So just moving forward, how Kubernetes is really architectured, or what are the components within Kubernetes, why it is important for us to understand so that we get a hang of it, that how Dynatrace really extracts all of these information out of Kubernetes, right? So within Kubernetes cluster, you have a Kubernetes control plane, right? Within control plane, you will have your Kubernetes API server, or basically we call it as Kube API server, right? So these Kube API servers are the ones that are making all of the communications, right? So when I say that they are making communications, so consider it that it's a bigger server, right, which has been broken into chunks, right? And that is where this API server plays a lot of role. So I'm making it a very, very high level understanding. I'm giving you guys a very high level understanding. There are a lot of things that happen in the background, but just to give you a quick ease, because I don't really know if you guys are very aware or if you have been using Kubernetes day in, day out, but that's just to give you a fair understanding, right? So within that bigger chunk of a server, we break everything within nodes. So what nodes are? Nodes are basically servers. Nodes are basically, let's say, a Linux box, right? That simple statement for nodes, right? So node को हम क्या consider कर सकते हैं? Node को हम एक कोई भी छोटा सा VM consider कर सकते हैं, right? Or any VM which is running Linux and it's inside a Kubernetes cluster, right? Within nodes, you will find different namespaces, right, which will contain pods. So there are two concepts. First, namespace, right? Namespace is basically a logical segregation, right? So let's say on a server, you could run multiple applications, but how do you know that this application belongs to this particular namespace? So you basically create a zone that these resources or these applications, these JVMs are only going to be confined in this particular space. So that is basically called as namespaces. And within those namespaces, you run pods, right? So pods are JVMs, right? Or pods are basically the entities or the application processes, or basically, I would say, uh, let's say your laptop is a node, right? So within that laptop, you have your Windows, you have your, let's say, Outlook, you have your Chrome, you have everything, right? So Chrome becomes one particular pod, right? And within these pods, you have services and your containers, right? So that's how these things are designed, right? So the first is going to be node, right? So that's the first entity. Within node, you will find namespaces. So there will be a lot of namespaces, right? So apologies for my handwriting. Within namespaces, you have pods, and within pods, you have services, right? So this is how the Kubernetes is really structured from the architectural perspective, right? So just moving along, right? How Dynatrace can really be installed, or how one agent really injects itself, right? Or how one agent interacts or gets integrated with the Kubernetes. That's something that we are going to look, right? And followed by that, we will also be looking how we can install one agent on a Kubernetes cluster, right? Okay. So here you have your control plane. Here is a worker node. When I say worker node, that means that this is basically a server, right? So this is basically a Linux box. Just consider it as a Linux box. So what really happens, we tell the Kubernetes control plane that Kubernetes, you need to spin up certain pods for Dynatrace to do all of these functioning. So you have to install the Dynatrace agent, right? And how I can install my Dynatrace agent, right? I will just be installing a couple of things, right? So the first thing that I'm going to install is called as the Kubernetes webhook agent, or basically the Kubernetes webhook, let's say pods, right? So these pods will communicate to Dynacube. So Dynacube is the bigger orchestrator for ourselves. Again, uh, it's a very high level understanding. There are a lot of things that happen in the background, but just uh, I'm trying to simplify all of these things, right? So what the webhook will do, it will give all of the information to Dynacube, and Dynacube reaches out to the operator, right? And the operator has the images and all of the file, which manages the one agent, right? And the active gate, right? So we have already, in the previous sessions, we have already seen what one agent is and what are the activities of one agent, right? So I'm not going to talk about that. There is a session that I'll be taking subsequently on the active gates particularly, right? But consider active gate as a proxy or a, let's say, channel via which you just route that data back to the Dynatrace cluster, right? So as of now, we'll not be getting into that, right? And along with that, with different models or deployment strategies, you get this Dynatrace CSI. So for your strategy, there may be a Dynatrace CSI driver, or there may not be a Dynatrace CSI driver. And we will be seeing like, why do we really need a CSI driver, or we don't really need a CSI driver, right? And these one agents are basically installed on this server, right? So this entire thing that you see on your screen, like this entire set, so the one agent is installed on this entire box, right? So it works that same way, what we have done in the previous sessions, right? And this one agent will inject itself in the pods, right? Right. And in another deployment strategy, there is another agent, which is kind of a lightweight agent, which we call as the CSI driver. So these CSI drivers also inject themselves in the Kubernetes pods, right? So that's how this entire functioning really works in the background. So I'll just remove all of these different, let's say, lines, right? So how it really works, kubelet gives all, or basically Dynatree, the Dynacube gives all of the information to the CSI driver that what needs to be done, on which pod do I need to install ourselves on, and the CSI gets there and injects itself within that application pod, and the application pods then send the data to the Dynatrace ActiveGate, and then the ActiveGate sends it to the Dynatrace cluster, right? So from where do we get all of these pods? So we get these pods from the public repositories that Dynatrace has already published, right? From there, we source all of these webhook and the operator and the CSI file. So the one agent and active gates are downloaded from your cluster itself. So they are personalized. They are already pre-configured for your cluster, right? That's how all of the things work in the background. So in the meantime, guys, do you have any questions? Just let me know. I just try to bring up my lab environment. Just give me a minute. Right. So if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Right. Or else we just get started. Right. So what are the different deployment models that I have for the one agent, which could be deployed on my Kubernetes instance, right? So what are my different deployment models on Kubernetes, right? So there are primarily four that we are going to talk about in today's session. Apart from these four, there are two or three more strategies that we use, but that totally depends upon how or which scenario you are in, right? So a very common deployment strategy is the classic full stack, right? And we will also be seeing like in which scenario what needs to be used, right? So the first and the very commonly used deployment strategy, which we used to use earlier, is called as classic full stack injection, right? So what really happens in this classic full stack injection, right? So I'll just do one thing. I'll open up the docs and show you exactly how it's done, right? So the first model is called as classic full stack injection, right? So within classic full stack injection, we will do all of these things. We are going to apply all of the same concepts, but there is no CSI driver in place, right? So if you look, right, so all we are doing is that we are taking all of my images and everything from the Dynatrace webhook, right, and sending it to Dynatrace Cube. And Dynatrace Cube is basically injecting the one agent all the way back into the pods, right? So the previous architecture that we just saw and this one, there is a slight difference, right? What is the slight difference? That we don't have a CSI driver here, right? Which we had in the previous slide, right? So if you remember, this is the CSI driver and that CSI driver was injecting itself in the pod, right? But in this scenario, we don't have that CSI driver. The one agent directly gets hooked up into the pods itself, right? So that is called as classic full stack injection or classic full stack monitoring, right? So what is the reason why both of the architectures are different, right? So in the classic full stack, you get a seamless end-to-end visibility within your host, your Kubernetes, all of those things. You get your code level visibility, you get your host level visibility, your pod level visibility, and everything, right? But there was one limitation with that, or there was one problem with that, right? That the agent was taking way too much amount of time, not way too much amount of time, but the agent has a dependency on the one agent helper, that the one agent helper, or basically the one agent has to start before the application starts in order to monitor it, right? So it's like if the one agent wakes up early, then he knows that the things which are happening in the background. But if the one agent does not wake up early, he does not know कि आगे क्या हुआ है, ठीक है? So the limitation was that there was a startup dependency between the container in which the one agent was deployed and the application container to be instrumented. For example, the containers that have deep monitoring process enabled, the one agent container must be started, or the helper process must be running before the container could be launched, or the container for the container to properly get instrumented. So the problem with that was that for any application which is built in a cloud friendly way, right, their uptime was very small and they used to come up quickly, right? And for Dynatrace to come up, it took around 1 or 2 odd minutes, and that led to a scenario where a lot of people were complaining that I am not able to see Dynatrace agents coming up. My environment is running, everything seems to be working fine, but I'm not really able to do the instrumentation. I have to take a restart of the application and again. So that's where the problem really was, right? So that's where Dynatrace really resolved this particular issue by introducing cloud native full stack injection, right? And with this cloud native full stack injection, what really changed, right? So they introduced this Dynatrace CSI driver, which is basically a lightweight agent, right? That gets hooked on to your pods, or that get attached to your pods. And this one agent, this CSI is injected in the pods, right? But with the CSI, we also need to install the Dynatrace agent, which internally circles back to CSI, gives all of those values, and then it gets integrated into the pods, right? So in both of the scenarios, right? So the capabilities are same. You don't really have to do much of a difference. There is no difference at all, right? All of the capabilities are same, but with that, you get a quicker injection and you get a quicker instrumentation, right? So that's where the difference is between the cloud native full stack and classic full stack. So classic में आपका एजेंट अप आने के लिए थोड़ा टाइम लेता था, जिसकी वजह से अगर एप्लीकेशन पॉड्स पहले आ गए तो वो इंस्ट्रूमेंट नहीं होते थे. बट विथ क्लाउड नेटिव फुल स्टैक, राइट, आपका CSI ड्राइवर पहले आ जाता है, दैट इंजेक्ट्स योर एप्लीकेशन and you get the full visibility. You don't have to take the restart of the application. So that's how it all got resolved, right? Right. So that's the model that we are going to see. So आज के session में हम इसी को instrument करेंगे because that's the latest way of deploying Dynatrace, right? उसके बाद platform monitoring, right? So let's say you just want to monitor your Kubernetes metric and nothing else, right? In that case, you don't have to use any agents. You don't have to use anything. Dynatrace straight away integrates with your Kubernetes APIs or your C advisors, basically the metric server, right? So if you remember, हमने जब Kubernetes का architecture देखा था, so there was an API server, right? So Dynatrace can integrate with this and take the data all the way back to Dynatrace, right? But the limitation for this particular methodology is that, and all of the four that we are discussing, it is being used in the industry day in, day out, right? So इसका limitation क्या है? Because there are no one agents, no operators, nothing. So I cannot really go and give you the code level visibility or traces or anything. If you want to monitor the infrastructure, health, events, or just the Kubernetes platform, right? That is where this really helps out, right? But अगर आपको code level visibility के लिए जाना है, then this is not something that I would recommend out to you, right? You can, however, combine your Kubernetes monitoring platform with the other monitoring and injection approaches. So that is something that you can see in the documentations as well, right? So if you wish, so this is how the architecture really looks like, right? So all of these things, so there is no one agent which is going to be installed. So everything is going to be taken care by the Kubernetes API. So the ActiveGate will collect all of the metrics from the Kubernetes API server and send it back to the Dynatrace cluster, right? So that's how this entire thing really works, right? And the fourth model that we are going to talk about is called as the application only monitoring and pod runtime injection, right? So this is basically, I don't really install an agent on my containers or on my pods. What I'll be doing, I'll just be injecting a particular pod to monitor it, right? I don't want to monitor my entire cluster. I only want to monitor one of the pod within my cluster, right? So in that case, it's a Kubernetes native. Dynatrace code modules are injected into the pods using the init container, right? It is flexible because your Kubernetes could contain, or basically your cluster could contain tens and hundreds of different applications running collectively, right? So you can only monitor one single application or one single pod or anything that you want, right? But the limitation for that would be that since there is no operator involved, so there would be no automatic injection or changes in the configurations or enrichment or enhancement that would happen, right? To instrument your application with Dynatrace, you need to manually define these configurations within your Kubernetes workloads, right? So ये आपको manual approach है थोड़ा सा जो फॉलो करना पड़ेगा, राइट? सो दिस डायनाट्रेस कोड मॉड्यूल, ये हम आपके स्क्रिप्ट्स में पास करते हैं, आपके YAML फाइल में पास करते हैं, एंड दैट इज हाउ यू विल बी एबल टू instrument all of these things, right? So there are other methodologies as well. There are other models as well, which is called as the application only, but this is this is more of an automatic injection, right? You can also follow that. You can go through that, right? So there are 6 different methodologies where you have your container build time injections, which I'll not be covering as of now because it will require much in-depth. Is cloud native mostly used in the real time? Yes. Cloud native will be used where you have new age applications, where you have, let's say, new age services that you are running. But anywhere where it's not a like a monolith application, then go with the classic full stack. But if you don't have a monolith architecture, you have more of a cloud friendly environment or more of cloud native application, then we go with the cloud native full stack, right? So that's the approach. When you create a new node, sometimes the one agent helper took some time. Restarted the application on the I mean classic full stack. Yes, Ashok. So in classic full stack, because it took a lot of time to come up, and that is where the problem really was, right? We had like issues that people were complaining that my pod is up, but Dynatrace did not inject itself, and there are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of problems within it starting up. So that's where the cloud native full stack came into picture, and that's where the cloud native full stack is the ideal way to go, right? Need cluster version. I am not sure on the cluster version. I have to check that, but definitely I would recommend you to be on the latest version because 1.290 is something that was released um, before even May, right? So I remember 1.292 is something that was released in May, right? So that's where this could be a challenge for you if you are running on a latest version. And this works both on SaaS and managed, so you don't have any problem. Right? So I've also documented all of these things. You can read the limitations, the capabilities, and all that, right, down here. And also there is a reference link to the documentation that I've showcased on the screen. You can also access that. Let's quickly jump into the demo, right, and see how we can quickly deploy all of these things on Dynatrace. And followed by that, we will just have a quick Q&A, right? So this is the terminal that I have, right? Let me open up my Dynatrace instance. Just give me a minute, guys. So any questions that you have? Yes, we will have one on classic. Probably. I'm not sure because I haven't seen really that. But again, I would recommend you to be on the latest version of Dynatrace to do all of these things, right? So let's just see how we can deploy the Kubernetes. So all you need to do is come down here and deploy Dynatrace, right? Click on Start Installation, get down onto the Kubernetes section, right? And you will be presented with that entire list, right? Or the set of commands that you need to run. So let's say I'll just say test cluster and then again test cluster. Just create those tokens and just copy these commands and you'll be good to go. Let's do it the classic way. I don't want to follow these commands. I want to go by the docs itself, right? I want to know what are the commands being called internally, right? So the first thing that you do within Kubernetes, if you remember, we create a namespace, right? So that's okay. The connection to the server, localhost was refused. Okay. I'm not sure. Let me just get this restarted. Reduce personalized post. Okay, I'm not sure. There seems to be some issue. Just give me a minute. अच्छा, okay. मैंने दूसरा instance file कर दिया था. Sorry, my bad. Just give me a minute, guys. Okay, so I delete this one. Should work fine, right? So all I need to do is just create a namespace, right? और मेरा namespace create हो जाएगा यहाँ पे, ठीक है? Automatically. Okay. अभी just मैंने up किया है तो मे बी ये सर्वर बैकग्राउंड में कुछ प्रोसेस कर रहा होगा. Okay, so I already have the namespace created. So I can say kubectl get namespaces, right? And I already have this Dynatrace created, right? And then all I need to do is copy the second command, right? But with that, right, the minute I copied this second command, so you will see that I have reference to a GitHub link, right? So your cluster needs an active connection to GitHub. If you don't have that, download this file, and within the file uh, there are different URLs which are going to be called, right? So one of the URL is going to be uh, custom resource definition. I'll also show you the file if time permits, right? So once you have executed this file, right, and you just try to get the pod, so you'll now see that I have deployed webhooks, right? So there are two containers. Bash loop backup. Ah, okay. Again, something broke it down. Okay. So these are the files that would come up, the webhook, the operator, right? So these are the two pods that will come up. So if we go back via the, I would say slides, right? So मेरा webhook download होता है पहले command से और operator download होता है, ठीक है? And with the second command, so troubleshoot करने का time नहीं है because we just have got 6 minutes left, right? So with that, let's say if I execute this second command, what would happen? It would also try to spin up additional set of pods, which are basically called as the CSI drivers, right? So these CSI drivers will just get spin up, right? So jitne bhi aapke nodes rahenge, that means how many number of servers that you will have, it will also give you that same exact amount of uh, like one engine CSI driver. So let's say if you have one node cluster, you will just have one CSI driver. Let's say if you have four clusters, then you will have these four different CSI drivers that would come up down here, right? So let me just see if, okay, so now my webhooks are running. My operator is having some issues, what I can see, but it goes back into running and then a crash to back off. Okay, never mind. I just don't want to troubleshoot it right away, right? And then all you have to do is you can run this file to see if everything has came up, right? सारी चीजें up आ गई हैं या नहीं. So once you run this particular command, so let me clear off the screen, right? It basically tells you that the webhooks are up and you are good to go, right? And with these webhooks, right, what would really happen, right? You can execute the next set of commands, right, which is basically this, where you need to download this file, which is dynacube.yaml. I already have this downloaded. Let me just open that up, right? And then we are just going to paste it within the Kubernetes cluster to get this agent rolled out, right? Right. So this is going to be my entire configuration file. I'll just copy this and what I'm going to do. So I'll just say vi dynacube.yaml, right? And then just paste it here. And then I will do, right? So this is my dynacube file. And then I will just do an, I'll just apply this particular file, right? So let's say apply -f dynacube.yaml, right? So the minute you apply this dynacube.yaml, so you'll see that it creates a secret down here, right? So secret is basically the API tokens that you create for the Dynatrace cluster and the server to get integrated, right? So if everything is working fine, which in our case isn't, right, I will be able to see, right, because my operator and my CSI driver didn't came up, but I should ideally be able to see my cluster, right? So यहाँ Kubernetes के अंदर में I will potentially, so if these files would have ran fine, right, I would have got my Kubernetes cluster listed down here, right? So यहाँ पे मेरा cluster आ जाता because that's an automatic correlation that works, right? So how do I really troubleshoot all of these issues? That is something that I'll be talking about in the next session, right? Because this is intentionally where things are broken down, right? So that's something that we'll be covering in the next set of sessions. So if you want to run all of these things, so there is another artifact that you can refer to. I'll also be putting it in the chat boxes or probably on the YouTube link, right? So this is one of the ways. So this is called as Kubernetes Playground, right? Which I am basically using. आप भी ये Kubernetes playground use कर सकते हो. This is provided by Dynatrace itself, and you can use all of these things. So there are different applications which are provided, which will fail, which will give you all of those scenarios, and then you can use all of these things, right? So that was all, guys, what I had planned for this session today, right? So let's get down to the Q&As. But I would rather, is your host name Linux host? Yes. Okay. In order to troubleshoot, yes, definitely. Right. So that's acha. uh, okay. Yes, some annotations here. Okay, fair. So any questions that you have, guys, feel free to put it in the WhatsApp group right away because the meeting link would expire within 2 minutes or so, right? So if you have any quick questions, I can take it up. And at the same time, let's say if you want to get this recording of the session and the document or the presentation that I was just showcasing, right? That could be accessed just by scanning this particular QR code, right? And there you will find this particular page coming up where you will have your documents linked down here, and any new sessions that we'll be conducting, it will be listed down here, right? So ये चीजें आपको instantaneously आप access कर सकते हो, right? Get down to this particular page, see all of the resources. The recording will be accessible under this particular section, right? And if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the WhatsApp group. But if you still feel like that you cannot really or you don't really want to put it on the WhatsApp group, then feel free to reach me out on LinkedIn, right? I'll be happy to help. So that was my time, guys. I know the sessions are really short and I'm working on it to get a premium version of this thing so that we can extend it to an hour or something. But that would take a little bit of amount of time. Thank you, guys. You have been a great audience, and see you next week, guys.